Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today. This is Kathy. Today I'll be creating a Halloween card using Witchy Kitty 2 from Impression Obsession. And I started by stamping the image onto a piece of 80-pound Nina Solar White cardstock. I used Memento Tuxedo Black ink because it is Copic friendly, and there's a whole lot of Copic coloring going on with this card. As always, the products will be linked in the description below. I'll also have information over on my blog as well, and I will link to that post in the description box as well. The colors that I use for this card, those will be listed out on my blog as well. So starting out, I kind of just colored in the bits and pieces of the moon that were still exposed that weren't wrapped by the ribbon. For the moon, I did use Y11, Y13, Y08, and Y15. Tiny little areas there, so there wasn't really a whole lot of shading going on, more little lines more than anything else. I did want it to be a little bit darker because the ribbon would be casting a shadow on there. For the stars, I used the same Ys. I used Y11, Y13, and Y08. And for the stars, I kept more of the shadow on the left-hand side there. So this little kitty, I went with the warm grays. I started with W4 to add a shadow that would be casted on his face from the brim of his hat. And then I added shading like around the base of his tail, around his forepaws there, and then on his body between his forepaws as well. And I blended out with W2, W1, and W0, and I kept trying to add more dark. And when I added the W4, when I added more of that in, I wasn't getting a really good blend by jumping down to the W2. So I do end up bringing in W3 right there so that I could get a better blend. One thing that I did concentrate on was leaving white space at the top of his knees. I guess those are his knees. And at the tip of his tail, so that I could blend it out so that they would appear to be a little bit lighter from where the light direction is coming. And as far as the direction, where my light source is, my husband and I kind of have a running joke. My light source tends to move while I color images. It's unintentional every time, but for whatever reason, I can't seem to keep my light source in the same spot. And every time he says, "What happened to your light source?" I kind of laugh and say, "Well, the sun moved." So in this case, I guess it's the moon moved. And for the ribbon, back to the coloring here, for the ribbon, I just went in and drew basically just lines with V06. And I did that on the pieces of the ribbon that, like the underlying pieces of the ribbon, so that it appeared to be pushed further back than the ribbon that's laying actually on top of the moon. I go in with my midtone, which is V05, just to add more color. And if I could do this card over again, which maybe someday I will, but I'll change up the color of the ribbons and the kitten's little clothes and whatnot. Anyway, I think that if I could do it over again, I would probably have the light source coming from the front. That's always kind of a good way to start if you're a beginner with coloring, whether you use markers or pencils or any other type of medium. By having the light coming right from the front, it's a little bit easier to keep your light source in one spot. Anyway, so I just continue on with the V05, adding more and more color, and you'll see how on the inside there of the moon is where I have added the most from the inside leading out to the very edge of the moon. And right there, you wouldn't, there was something that fell on my desk, and I'm not really sure what it was, but I nearly jumped out of my chair when it fell. And actually, I cut quite a bit of that part out of the video because there was a lot of hand flinging going on. Here I'm moving on to almost my lightest color. It's a V01, and I'm filling in most of the white space that I left previously. I am leaving a little bit of white on the very edge there, so I can blend that out and have the lightest part on the outside of the crescent moon. As I'm going along, you saw me tap my fingers a little bit. As I'm going along, I realize that I'm blending out all of my darker colors, but again, the beauty of Copics is you can go in and add the dark back in to reintroduce all the shadows and the shading that you want to accomplish with whatever image that you may be coloring. This image, there's quite a few little spots and whatnot, but it really didn't take horribly long to color. I've had some images that have taken me hours upon hours, and this one I probably did in about 45 minutes, mostly because I actually had all my colors picked out ahead of time. That is one thing that I used to be very guilty of, was I wouldn't pick my colors out ahead of time. I would just kind of pick them as I went along. The lesson learned for me there is pick them out ahead of time, and it makes the coloring a whole lot easier. So to fill in all that white space, I went in with a V00, and it kind of turned out to be a little bit too light for me, and it blended some of the areas on the moon there too much. And you'll see in just a few seconds that I'm going to go back in with my V05 as well as the V01 to darken up some of the areas there that got too light. Oh, right after I fill in that one spot of the moon that I forgot to fill in. Yeah, so I come back in with the V05 and I pull it out a little bit further than I did the first time. Being that was one of my two midtones, I wanted more of that color showing than the lighter colors. And the V00 really does end up lightening the colors that are underneath it quite a bit. For lack of a better word, it almost bleaches them out. And since it did bleach them out so much, I just went back in with the V05. And then I go over it again with the V01. And I think that this time when I go in with the V01, I take it all the way out to the left edge of the moon, so that that side of it isn't so light. Yeah, I did. I just let my V01 be the lightest color there. And there were some spots where I didn't go quite all the way to the edge, just to add a little bit of interest and a little bit of imperfections, I guess would be the word that I'm trying to use there. Look at that. I go back in with the 00 just to blend. Oh, okay. Yeah, that was just to blend out some of the harsher lines that I had there. So I didn't go in with it quite as heavy as I did the very first time. Moving on to the little hat on the cat, I started with WG17, and that was just to add the shading along the top part of the brim there and on the outer edges of either side of the hat. Went in with YG03 and then filled in with YG01, which ended up blending out all of my dark, so I end up going back in with my midtone to add some of that back in, and then I think I go in with the 17 again. Yeah, just to reinforce those shadows and the shading again. I thought with having the cat being that I colored him in warm gray, I didn't really want to do his hat in black. I thought that it would probably get lost, and I thought green and orange would be a good color, and then to tie in the purple from the ribbon around the moon, the other stripes, I guess, on the band of the hat there, I went in with V06 and V01. The oranges that I used on the band are YR12 and YR68, and again, not a lot of real estate in those areas, so it was just very, very like a dot of the darker color, and then I blended it out with the lighter color. And for his scarf, I stayed with the green so that I could tie in his hat, and then I brought in the orange to tie in his hat, and then his sweater is also going to be orange. So for the scarf, I did YG17 and YG01, as well as YR12 and YR68. And again, not a lot of real estate there, so it was a dot of the darker color, and then I blended out with the lighter color. For his sweater, I started with my YR12, which is the lightest color, and I just kind of filled in the whole sweater so that I could kind of see where I was going to have to add in some shadows. Sometimes it's easier for me to do it that way. Here I go in with the YR68 and add a shadow underneath the scarf and on either side of his front paws. And then I go in and I blend it out with YR15. And I did actually torture myself and go around all of the little dots on his sweater. Normally I would use the same color family and just go with a really dark color so I don't have to go around them. But I really wanted to do purple dots on his sweater, so I used the V06. And again, that was to keep it cohesive with the ribbon that's wrapped around the moon. And now that all of the coloring is done, I sat there and stared at it for a minute, trying to figure out how I was going to finish this up. So off screen, I just created a mask. I just stamped the image on a piece of scrap paper and cut it out. I didn't worry about the ribbon tails on the moon because I knew that the ink wouldn't affect those too much. I just put some two-way glue from Zig on the back of my mask, let it dry completely before I placed it over my stamped image. Zig two-way glue as well as the Tombow multi-mono glue. They become temporary if you let them dry first. So obviously I put the mask over my stamped image, and before I brought the cloud stencil in, I just did a really, really light dabbing using the sponge, and I kind of went over the whole image, and I am using smoky gray VersaFine ink. When I do bring the cloud stencil in, I kind of apply more pressure, but just along the very top edge of the stencil, and actually pull over the edge of the stencil towards myself. That creates a nice darker line for the top of the clouds. And then here, there were some areas where it was just a little bit too white still in those clouds, so I just did a very, very light hand dabbing. I know it looks like I'm going really, really fast, but really, really light hand just to get a little bit of color. And there I just went over that one part of the stencil there again, just to make that top cloud stand out a little bit more. The cloud stencil is actually from Rosie's Roadshow, and I've had it for like at least 100 years. I'm happy she still has it available, and of course that'll be linked down below in the description. And here I am removing the mask, and you can see that my kitty, the moon, the stars, they're all fine, except that area there I wanted to go in and add a little bit more gray. So the next thing that I did was I stamped my Happy Halloween onto a piece of black cardstock. I used Memento Luxe wedding dress ink with white embossing powder and heat set that. Had all the pieces cut up ahead of time so that you didn't have to watch me cut paper, and just used my Tombow Multi-Mono Liquid Glue to adhere those pieces down. On the back of the panel with the kitty, obviously I'm going to use foam tape because it's very rare that I don't use foam tape at all. And I do appreciate you tuning in today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. The sentiment, I also used foam tape. And there you have it. The final step, of course, was to use a Wink of Stella glitter pen to go over those stars, and that's the whole card. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe.